What was the best thing the quiet kid has said or done in class? My wife told me of a really quiet kid in her class. No one ever heard him speak because he has some sort of mental thing and the teacher knew not to call on him. The last week of school this kid finally speaks. 100% British. This is in the cornfields of the Midwest. A little short blonde girl with a really high-pitched voice read a poem she wrote about how death is unescapable and everyone will die. The quiet kid in my class was sorta bullied by this kid who had a cleft chin. One day the cleft chin guy insulted the quiet kid, and the quiet kid came back with the insult, "Is your mouth so filthy because someone faced you in the chin?" It was 6th grade and the whole table, we were seated as groups, busted out laughing. It was a dirty joke, so check, and it was aimed at a bully, double check. He became known as the chin-faced kid, which was hilarious to us 6th graders. We were in health class, on the topic of domestic abuse. Somehow the subject turns to how Britney Spears received backlash for abusing her kids. Kid in the back says, probably because she hit her baby one more time. 6th grade science class. Teacher was out of the room and we were facing around with hot plates. While messing around, one of my classmates burns his hand pretty bad on a hot plate and has to go to the nurse. Right after he leaves the room, quiet kid enters and casually says, "Smells like burnt flesh in here," and just sits down like it was nothing. Everyone turned and just stared at him. 7th grade, new kid named Nick started school halfway through the year. He sat next to me in English class and didn't say anything ever. One day, we were reading poems out loud and critiquing each other. One sorry fella read his, and every line started with, "If I was a bird, if I was a bird, I'd live in a tree. If I was a bird, I'd fly to school. If I was a bird." A few people offered polite criticism. The teacher called on Nick for his opinion, and he said, "If I was a bird, I'd poop on all of you." He got kicked out of class, and I still laugh every time I think about it. We became friends and he was actually a pretty nice guy. I think he just couldn't resist making that joke. We had a kid at our high school who refused to speak for the entirety of our high school career, even if a teacher called on him. The day we graduated he spoke for the first time. His reasoning for his 4 years of silence was just because I could. It wasn't in class, but during our high school's variety show my senior year. This quiet guy who typically sat in the back of class and didn't really chat it up with anyone, played the most epic guitar solo ever. It was amazing. Still remember it 10 years later. Beat the shit out of the kid that kept poking, touching, slapping at him. I think it was around the 7th time he said, "Dude, please stop," before the blood came. One time we had a huge man for a guest speaker, and when he arrived he was eating a foot long and his excuse was he missed breakfast, and the quiet kid muttered, "I facing doubt that." Almost exactly like from Trailer Park Boys. The dorky short pudgy kid was being bullied by the really popular class jock. Dork rushed the jock, pulled his shirt over his head and began beating him pretty good hockey style. The jock actually transferred schools the next year. Not sure if it was because of that or what, but he wasn't popular anymore. There was a girl who went the entirety of middle school never speaking a word unless absolutely necessary. One day the class was being rowdy while the teacher was out of the room and in the raspiest, deepest voice ever yelled, "Shut up." We all shut up. My friend was the quiet kid in high school drafting class. Back when drafting was done on paper, there was another kid harassing him from across the room. He took his T-square, about 2 feet long, made of wood, sharp edges, and whipped it across the room, hitting his harasser square on the side of the head. The resulting head wound required several stitches. When I was a kid I was obsessed with The Simpsons, and one day I kept narrating everything in the Duff Man voice. Duff Man says, "Oh yeah, etc." Eventually the quiet kid next to me stood up and screamed, "Shut the fuck up." I don't give a fuck what the Duff Man says. He got in trouble and I didn't, cause the teacher hadn't heard any of my Duff Man quotes. I still think about him sometimes. I'm sorry man, I was being so annoying and you didn't deserve to get in trouble. Smart, nerdy, quiet kid in the front of class, always answered questions correctly when called on. One day the teacher calls on him and before he even answers the teacher just lazily says correct and turns back around to write on the board. The second the teacher turns around, the quiet kid just rockets his pencil upward into the ceiling like an arrow. The teacher doesn't notice. It was just such a sudden, unexpected act of rebellion from the quiet kid that never said anything. The whole class saw it and by the time the teacher turned around the quiet kid was playing it cool as ice and taking notes again. The teacher doesn't notice. Finally the teacher turns around again to ask another question, and the entire class is trying not to laugh and everyone is trying not to look at the pencil stuck into the ceiling. The teacher still doesn't notice. A couple of people laugh, and every time the teacher asked what is so funny, the situation became even more hilarious. Finally the teacher turns around again and continues the lesson, completely oblivious. It was boring math class and it was the funniest thing that happened all year. Classmates used to throw crumpled paper balls at her every day because they knew she wouldn't react. One day she started picking them up, spitting on them, and throwing them back. The teacher just smiled and watched. Sorry if this is anticlimactic. It was something that was a lot better if you went through it, haha. There was a quiet kid in my class and he always got up 5 minutes before class ended every day, like to the exact second. One day he got up 20 minutes before class and I said you not. The whole class gasped. When the teacher asked him where he was going, he responded, I need to go check my blood sugar a little earlier today because I'm going home early to visit Disney. Kid was so quiet, no one even knew he was diabetic. He didn't mention it ever. LOL. Not in school, but I teach middle to high school kids, 13 to 17, how to umpire baseball games. There was one kid, 13 years old, who was very quiet, reserved and shy, and I thought, this is not the vocation for him. A week later I swing by the field to evaluate him and see if I can help him with anything. I arrived about 5 minutes after the game started and I could hear loud, confident and definitive calls coming from this kid. I was floored. His mom came up to me and said that becoming an umpire has completely changed his personality. My sister told me about a quiet guy that asked to go to the bathroom but the teacher refused and so just stood up and pissed himself in class. Quiet kid in my theater class, they're for the crew type jobs. Our teacher asks us questions daily, and the day's question was what's your favorite Easter candy, or normal candy if you don't celebrate. One kid said chocolate bunnies, and the teacher asked what they liked it filled with. Kids chimed in with stuff like peanut butter or marshmallow cream. But this girl just says organs, in the most monotone voice imaginable. I'm tired of this, said while unzipping his backpack. Geometry teacher was bragging about how well he drew circles and going on about how one day he would draw a perfect circle. He asked us what would happen if he drew a perfect circle. My friend, a sweet, quiet girl, says rather loudly, you die. Can't really remember the reaction of the class, but I laughed and the teacher looked totally crushed. One girl screamed, I just wanted to fuck randomly in class. Sell drugs. He was the typical quiet, good kid who always made good grades. He was also the best drug dealer at our school. Since all the teachers saw him as this innocent angel, he never once got caught. Mean girl told quiet friend she was going to beat her up in the parking lot the next morning. Half jokingly I said grab that bitch by the hair and feed her some uppercuts. Next morning I pull in and lo and behold she's got the half-conscious mean girl by the hair and is absolutely destroying her. Realized I never told her when to stop and jumped out of the car and broke it up. Quiet kid in summer school was being constantly bullied by the loud Ashit kid behind him. Ashit calls the quiet kid a very uncool name without missing a beat, and in the flash of a second kid spins, sticks a pencil completely through the guy's hand and sits back front ways. It was so quick we were not even sure it happened, except for the pencil stuck in the other guy's hand and the screaming and blood. A girl that used to sleep during class went to the director office because there was too much noise in our philosophy lecture. Next class, right after she started sleeping, and the quiet kid woke her up and warned her he wasn't going to let her sleep ever again. Legit. In college my friend Harry was the quiet kid, but one day in the dead silence he randomly said, oh, if I were a turtle. In the last trimester of senior year, we were assigned a pass-fail essay. If we made any grammatical, stylistic, or formatting mistake, we would fail. It was traditional for the seniors of each year to write an bomb-said essay, and the teachers would never stop gloating about how impossible it was. The quiet kid in my class wrote a perfect essay. I remember going to JR High in this small hick town in Texas while I was on probation. That's a long story. Had a quiet kid who was actually really popular, not bullied at all like most quiet kids. Anyway, I was new, had only been going to the school for about a month when this happened. We had a substitute teacher for one of our classes. She was doing a quick roll call and got to his name, Piojos. She said, "That's an interesting and beautiful name. What does it mean?" He said, "Lice." There was dead silence and confused looks all around. This kid had been going to the school since kindergarten, small town, and had always gone by Piojos, which was his nickname. Nobody had a facing clue what it meant, let alone that it was his real name. All of his paperwork at the school had to be updated and everything. I thought it was hilarious. Some pudgy girl was insulting a quiet kid at lunch and said he was a trash can because all his ideas were garbage. He told her she must be a refrigerator because she seems like where all the food goes. Not a crazy thing, but bit of a mad love moment. When I was in kindergarten, we had a buddy system to help us make friends easily. I have always been an extrovert, so I was paired with most introverted quiet kid in my class. He barely spoke, but for some reason I liked him and we played together often. My father got transferred to a different state that year, so I had to go as well. He was pretty sad when I told him, and when I was leaving I gave him a Chinese yuan coin that I used to play with. Storytell here is what my parents told me. I have almost no memory of this except for the coin. 7 years later, I was in 6th grade and my dad had just gotten transferred to a different state again. I was short and chubby back then and I used to get picked on by the class bullies. I expected it to be better when I moved, so I was pretty happy. When I started at my new school, it was basically the same thing all over again, just different bullies doing the same thing. We had lunch breaks out in the open, and during one such lunch break, I tripped while I was walking and bumped into one of my bullies and made him drop his lunch. You guessed it right. They were not happy. They ganged up on me and started shoving me pretty hard. Thankfully the break was over, so they stopped and headed back to class. Little did I know they planned to humiliate me in class. They planned to pour water on my pants as I was entering the classroom and were gonna spread the rumor that I had peed my pants. When I was about to enter, thought someone came from inside the classroom and stood between me and the bully and took a splash of water to his side. Turns out this guy heard them talk about it and decided to act on it. The guy who got splashed was the same quiet guy from earlier. He didn't know who I was, and neither did I at first. I found out later when I saw the yuan with him. He had his mom stitch it to his backpack. World is a small place indeed. One kid would be able to have super quiet phone conversations with his mom during class. Everyone right next to him would know he was on the phone, but the teacher and the rest of the class had no idea. Granted, these weren't long convos, but they were still hilarious to witness. This one kid in high school said he wanted to go to Harvard, and this quiet dude in the back of the class said, "Harvard? No. Stewart's maybe." Stewart's is our local cosmetology school. Whole class lost it. Scene. Biology teacher. Now, even though clones are the same genetically, they may come out differently. If we clone James here, his clone might have more access to quiet kid friends. Teacher doesn't even argue and just looks sadly at the kid. Not as extreme as others, but still completely unexpected. Professor was talking about the personalities of different cities and says something like, "Some cities have a lot of personality and talk a lot, some cities whisper, and some cities don't seem to be saying anything at all." At which point this quiet kid who had never uttered a word says, almost under his breath, "Topeka." That was all. Kid had some feelings about Topeka, Kansas. There was a fly in the room. He threw his pencil straight up and facing skewered the fly, and the pencil got stuck in the ceiling. It was those really weak plaster tile things, but it was the coolest thing I've ever seen. I wish I could go back in time and record it. I used to be the quiet kid who didn't say much in class. I was also known as the one girl who was pretty good at drawing. I don't know if this would be considered the best thing I ever did, but I do remember something I am somewhat proud of. For my 11th grade English class, we read through Shakespeare's Macbeth, and the project for that module was a creative project that incorporated the themes of the play. 2 of those themes were internal, external, hell and torture. For some reason, we had to present our projects to the class. So, my 11th grade self decided to take all the characters in Macbeth and draw them as tortured spirits, connected to a specific medieval torture method. So, Macbeth was drawn with a prisoner's collar, a device that was used to prevent sleep just like he was deprived of in the play. Banquo was drawn with a heretic's fork, a device that was used to prevent a person from talking, just like how Banquo was killed in order to guarantee his silence, etc. etc. I got an A+ on that project, but the presentation of it to the class certainly earned me a few stares. Whoops.